I'd like to introduce myself. I am the lead for the Genomic Data Commons, or GDC, User Services team, and I have a lot of experience with the submission process in general. I was going to be joined by my colleague Colin Reed, but he couldn't make it today. So there were some demos that were supposed to be given. Those will not be done today. So I can work with anybody individually through the help desk. And if there's enough questions about this type of thing, we can always reschedule another webinar about this. So, okay, next slide. Okay, thank you. So apologies, everyone. As I was saying before, the GDC is not only a repository of clinical biospecimen and molecular data, but we process this data, and the molecular data is harmonized across many different standardized pipelines, and the clinical and biospecimen data is curated so that not only is the molecular data meaningful, but the molecular data can be processed using the correct parameters and pipelines. As I said, the data is harmonized using a common set of bioinformatics pipelines, and they're all, anytime an alignment can be performed, it is aligned to the GRCH38 genome, reference genome. And this allows researchers to submit data for harmonization and eventually release it to the research community through the GDC portal. Next slide. Okay, so here's a submission checklist that goes from the beginning to the end of the submission process. So from the part where you request submission to when the data is actually released to the portal, these are the steps. Steps 1, 2, 3, and 4 are administrative steps that must be taken. Actually 5 too. 6 and 7 is where a lot of the work comes in, and this is all available on the GDC website right now. So this gives you, the submitter, a logical sequence of steps to perform to get your project submitted and released. Next slide. Okay, so the first thing that a prospective submitter would do is to fill out the GDC Data Submission Request form. This is a series of questions that tell us things like who to contact. It gives us a description of your project to make sure it's a good fit with the GDC, and a description of what data you have. So you would tell us information like how many patients is this for, which experimental strategies are being processed, and what kind of metadata do you have for these experimental strategies. And one of the questions on here is, do you have an ERA Commons account? And an ERA Commons account is 100% required to submit to the GDC. Next slide. Okay, so when you submit data, you need to adhere to some of the NIH NCI genomic data sharing policies. We've included some links here so that you can go back and check out these policies to make sure everything adheres to these. We require that organizations register projects and cases, which is what we call subjects or patients, in dbGaP. So these patients need to be registered in dbGaP before they can be submitted to the GDC. In general, the GDC accepts, biospecimen, clinical, and the genomic molecular data from human research subjects. So just here's a few little guidelines for how many patients we usually would like in a project. Sometimes fewer are accepted if there's enough data, and more are always appreciated, but if there's not enough data, sometimes those aren't accepted too. Next slide. Okay, so once the study is approved, the next step is to contact the Genomic Program Administrator, or GPA, and to register the project in dbGaP. If you don't know who your GPA is, here's an email address you can use to ask. The GPA will help set up the study in dbGaP, and it would indicate that the GDC is the data sharing platform. The patients would be registered to dbGaP so that that would be communicated to the GDC, and authorized data submitters would also be communicated to the GDC through dbGaP. And dbGaP will also provide the additional institutional information about the study. Next slide. Okay, so after the dbGaP invitation is done, the study will be assigned a PHS ID, which is just its basic identifier in dbGaP, and that's required to create a project in the GDC. Additionally, the study configuration and the subject IDs can be registered. Next, the GDC will create a project in the GDC Submission Portal. And apologies, I didn't actually mention it on here. This will be done through the GDC Help Desk through correspondence. So what the first step will be is we'll ask for two identifiers for the project, the program name and the project. If this is a standalone project, it typically doesn't matter what you want it to be. It just has to be something dash something. But if there's going to be a logical next project that's kind of part of an all-encompassing program, we'd want to keep your program to be the same, and then a project would be an identifier of a subset of that program. So for example, there's two here, TCGA SARC, so that's the sarcoma project in the TCGA project. But as many of you already know, TCGA has many other projects with it. And then we'll ask for a project name too. So usually something that's just descriptive, that just describes what kind of data is in your project. Next slide. Okay, so basically then after all of the different, after the different cases and subjects are registered in dbGaP, one would review the GDC Dictionary and the GDC data model and download templates based on these. And these templates would be would show the necessary information to submit a particular entity. Next slide. So when I say entity, that means one of these circles here. Next slide, I think more information. So these ovals represent each of the different type of data that can be submitted. So a case would be one of these entities. A sample, which would be associated with the case, would be one of these entities. And the lines, which are the edges, let you know which of these entity types can be associated with which. So for example, downstream of a sample, you can associate a portion, or you can attach an aliquot directly to the sample. Each of these entities has different properties that I explained, and these are specified in the GDC Data Dictionary. We have a link here that'll bring you to it, and that shows all of the different fields, properties, and the necessary criteria to fill out each of these fields for when you do want to submit one of these entities. Next slide. Okay, here's the GDC Data Dictionary. I just explained it. It defines the individual data components, and it gives you a list of all the possible submittable entities. So those can be browsed, checked out, and the correct information can be assessed based on what is in these nodes here. Next slide. Okay. One more thing that I forgot to mention about the GDC Data Dictionary is that it provides templates. So if you weren't sure where to start, it will allow you to download a TSV or JSON-based template, both of which are valid to submit to the GDC. and those are just blank slates that can be filled out, and anything that can't be filled out can be deleted as long as it's not required. Attached to the GDC documentation site, there will be a link at the end. There is also a data dictionary search tool, and that will allow you to search for synonyms because, as you know, some of these systems will only have certain names, and if you want to look up a particular term that you think this should be something we can submit to the GDC, you can type it into here and it'll show you the actual field within the actual entity that can be submitted to the GDC. Next slide. Okay, so the GDC Submission Portal it's a nice platform that it's a user interface and enables submission of clinical biospecimen and the molecular file nodes to the GDC. So the actual files themselves cannot be submitted through this. This requires another tool, which we will get into later. Next. Here's the dashboard. As you can see, there are 4 of these little graphs here. Each of them has information such as the number of cases with clinical data, and it shows which percentage of them, the number of cases with biospecimen data, the number of cases that have associated data files, so this can include biospecimen supplements or molecular files, and the total number of data files that are registered in the GDC versus the number that are actually uploaded. Next. When you click to upload data, this little submission wizard comes up to which you can choose which files in JSON or TSV format you would like to upload, and it'll bring you to the next screen. Next slide, which will validate it, and that will bring the node or the entity into the GDC Submission Portal. You can see which things you've already submitted by going to the Browse tab in the GDC Submission Portal, and that will list each and every entity that has been submitted for your project. Next slide. After all of the entities and files you require are uploaded, there are some regulations on what can and can't be submitted that are not taught by the dictionary. And these will be shown on the QC report tab of the GDC Submission Portal. Next slide. And here's some documentation on the GDC data submission workflow. So if you go to that link, it'll tell you some pretty in-depth details of how this works from beginning to end of actual data submission. Next slide. So the next step is to upload the case information, and these are the dbGaP submitted subject IDs. So the case submitter ID field will need to match the dbGaP subject ID that is registered there. And then when the cases are done, biospecimen and clinical data can be uploaded. Next slide. Apologies, this is just a sequence. There were supposed to be demos in here, but those the person who put those together couldn't make it today. So after biospecimen data is uploaded, the data files, so this includes a BAM file, an alignment, some unaligned reads in FASTQ format, are registered, which means you provide the metadata, which includes things like file name, MD5 sum, file size for validation, and those data files can then be uploaded. So they're first registered, and then they can be uploaded, and this is done using the data transfer tool. At the end, there will be a link to show where the data transfer tool can be downloaded, and there are some tutorials in our documentation for how to do that. Next slide. So after everything is all done and complete in a submission project, we want the submitter as well as the GDC, we will both come together and verify the accuracy and completeness of the project data. Next slide. So this is the QC report I was talking about before. The GDC provides this interactive QC report dashboard that provides a list of QC errors that couldn't be caught by the dictionary. So these errors are divided into two different categories. There's critical, which means we will absolutely not harmonize this data before this is fixed. The warning error, it means this is not necessarily a problem, but we want the submitter to check it out before, just to verify that no problems are happening. And in the documentation site, we have a list of all the possible errors that come out of this QC report and how they can be resolved. Next slide. Okay, so after everything's 100% good and things can be harmonized, there is a request data submission button in the GDC Submission Portal. And once you click that, a notification will be sent to the GDC Help Desk letting us know that the submitters want us to harmonize the data. So the GDC will then review and QC the submitted data, and then it will be pushed down to harmonization. Next slide. Okay, so after a project is QC'd, the submitter would click on the review button in the GDC Submission Portal. This is what I was describing before. Submitters can reopen, so clicking the review button locks the project temporarily so that no other data can be submitted and things are in a static state. So after everything looks okay, you can click the Request Harmonization button that you can see in the screenshot right here, or the project can be reopened if new things have to be applied to the project. Then the Submit Validated Data to the GDC button is clicked, and the GDC will start to process the data through the harmonization pipelines. Next slide. Okay, so after the GDC data is harmonized, users will be able to download the harmonized data using either a manifest or using the IDs that are taken from the submission portal. So some harmonized files will show up on the submission portal. Then while the submission QC is performed, the submitter can let us know when the data is okay to release. After we get permission to release the data, and that has to be within 6 months of the harmonization completing, the data will be scheduled to be released in one of the GDC data releases. Next slide. Okay, so so as I was saying before, the data will only be available to the submitter through the GDC Submission Portal, and when it says other data access tools, that means usually that a manifest will be provided and it can be downloaded using the GDC data transfer tool. So 6 months after the processing is done is when the data must be released. Usually we'll get permission before then, but it depends on publications and all of those complicated things that can arise. And then in a subsequent data release, this data will appear on the GDC portal, and submitters will be notified of this. Next slide. Okay, so here are some references and some links. And down at the bottom where it says GDC Assistance, this is the help desk email. My team and I can be reached at this email address for any questions involving data submission or anything else pertaining to the GDC. Next slide. That's the end of this this webinar. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to hear them. Please type them into the chat window.
Hi, Bill. There's a couple of questions. Is there a list of minimum value fields that are required for submission?
I'm sorry, what was that? You cut out for a second.
Is there a list of minimum values fields required for submission? I'll bring up the data dictionary so people can see.
So as Sharon just mentioned, this is available in the GDC Data Dictionary. Each of these fields, each of these entities here will have a list of fields, and at the very top are the ones that are required. So as you can see, the ethnicity, gender, race, and a few other things are required if one were to submit the demographic entity. In addition to these things, you can't just upload a floating demographic entity because that doesn't quite make sense. You would have to associate it with a case, and additionally, it would have to be given a unique ID or a submitter ID, which you can see at the top there.
May I get this PowerPoint? What we do is we actually record this and we make this available on the GDC website. So if you go to the GDC website, you can go to the support page, and we've had several different webinars. You can see here today's webinar. We have one coming up in December that focuses on the APIs. But the past webinars, if you the past webinars, for example, the data analysis and visualization, if you select to read more, you actually can see the presentation along with a recording of this video. So we're going to be doing the same thing and put that out. We typically also tweet when it's made available. So definitely join our Twitter feed and you can see that. Okay. How do you know if somebody else submits a similar data record? Any keywords search function? Question. How do you know?
Sharon, can you repeat the question? You got cut off.
Yes. How do you know if somebody else submits a similar data report? Do any keywords search function?
So there is a keyword search function to search for similar data types that are that you can submit, and that's the GDC Dictionary tool. Usually, it's okay to submit data that's similar to somebody else's as long as it's not the same patients. So that's something that would have to be externally worked out.
Is it? I guess my question is it similar as in like somebody else has already submitted and you wanted to use the same term, or similar as in two cases with same data?
I'm sorry, Hamad. So everybody's muted except for the speaker?
Okay. So maybe we can go to the next question.
Yes. How often do you do you change, update ontology dictionary, and how do you communicate that information to the users?
Oh, that's a good question. So So the dictionary is changed every few months, and this will usually include a lot of updates. This information is communicated through the release notes and through an email blast that happens after the dictionary is released.
Okay. Is your dictionary NCI Thesaurus compliant?
Is it NCI Thesaurus compliant? To be honest, I am not 100% sure what makes something NCI Thesaurus compliant, but in the GDC...
Yeah, each of the different terms are assigned an NCI Thesaurus. So we work closely with the EVS team, and so we do have NCI term IDs for the fields. Go ahead, Doug.
If you go to the search, vocabulary search, you can see the NCI Thesaurus terms next to it. I don't know, Bill, if you can get to it, the documentation page. If you click on the search, do dictionary search. And you can pick one term. If you open up the cross, I believe, yeah, it'll show you, that's the term, the NCIT term, the C. So, and then you click on it, you can get more information, and you can get to the search too from there, NCIT.
The GDC client makes some assumptions about where files live when doing the submission. What would be the best way to submit feature requests about it?
Thank you for that. So I am aware that using there's a certain flag that you can pass to the GDC client that gives it a file path. Apologies, I cannot remember exactly what that flag is right now, but the best way to submit a feature request would be to contact the GDC help desk, and we will inform our development team, and whatever improvements can be made will be prioritized, and we'll always try to suggest a workaround wherever we can.
Okay. Have issues or through the help desk?
Oh, that was in addition to the last question.
Okay. All right. Is there an outer limit that you recommend number of pieces per records to submit or download metadata at any given time without straining your portal?
Yes. So right now the portal, the way the GDC API works is that not all of your entities can be submitted at once. Usually when I submit, which I do sometimes, I like to keep it down to around 2,000 entities at a time. Sometimes you can do higher, sometimes going a little bit lower is a good idea, but from 1,000 to 2,000 is usually the magic number that I found.
Are there any other questions?
Sharon, there was a question from Anand. You missed that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is the current bug related to warning errors on the QC report being actively resolved? Any updates?
Yes. So that is being resolved. It should be resolved within the next 2 data releases, or software releases, my apologies. So there aren't any current updates, but that is being worked on. We also have a workaround that if anybody is facing this problem, needs to contact us, we'll be happy to help.
Okay, and I know there's a comment on a demo of the submission functionality. That's something we'll have to schedule at a later time because the person that was going to demo the features was out sick today. Are there any other? Okay, let's see. Can you? Here's one. Can you please provide a list of the cases that are being harmonized when we request harmonization?
So that is a good question. I will have to talk to our bioinformatics team about if they'd be able to do that. The way it works right now, when a project has multiple batches, it's everything that hasn't been harmonized yet that is in the GDC portal is harmonized at that given time. So it's not 100%, it's not something that can be retrieved directly through the submission portal. So I will talk to the bioinformatics team about that, and we'll see what can be provided.
Okay, any other questions? I think that's about it for today's webinar. Thanks, everybody. We really appreciate your attendance, and please keep a watch out for other webinars and our next webinar, which is coming up. We usually have the webinars at the last Monday of the month, but because of the holidays, we had to move this up to December 16th. So hope you can attend that webinar. We really appreciate you attending. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.